Hey y'all, welcome back again to another episode of Healthy Design. So we took a little break last week from insulin resistance to answer Sarah's question, talk a little bit about hormones, carb cycling, dieting. So I hope you guys enjoyed that little reprieve, but today we'll get back to insulin resistance. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about kind of insulin and some of its relationships with bone, muscle, skin, and we'll throw in just a little bit of inner ear too. Why not? All right, so let's start with skin. So there's a condition called acanthosis nigricans. What this leads to is dark patches on the skin. It tends to occur where the skin kind of rubs together, but it can occur anywhere. It is commonly seen in people that are diabetic, but it can occur in people that are just insulin resistant too. And so sometimes we're seeing that insulin resistance starting before they're technically diabetic. So that's why I say it that way. But what tends to happen is that issue with insulin, so being resistant to that signal and the insulin levels being higher, leads to increased activity of the melanocytes, which they play a role in melanin, which helps us to get a tan, different things like that. So now these patches, though, they don't look like you just had a tan. It's definitely very different. But like I said, we see with insulin resistance, you get that increased melanocyte activity. What they've also found in studies, like the severity of insulin resistance actually will increase the severity of that acanthosis nigricans. Now, this issue can occur with other things. So again, it's not that insulin resistance in and of itself is the sole cause, but there is a connection there. So that's what we're seeing with all these things is there's a connection. It's not so much that necessarily this causes everything. Maybe a better way to think about things is that, if there's a metabolic issue going on, our body runs on our metabolism. That's how every chemical reaction that occurs and everything that's happening in the cells has to occur via metabolism. It needs energy. So if that gets messed up, that can mess up a lot of other things. Depending on what area of the body, what cells are primarily affected, is going to kind of determine what issues you see or how it plays out for you. So that's why you can have the same root cause for something in multiple different people, but yet it leads to different issues with those people. Hopefully that makes sense. One other thing, skin condition, and one that you do often see with the acanthosis nigricans is skin tags. And so insulin resistance can play a role here. Again, that increased insulin resistance or increased insulin levels lead to increased resistance of different cells. In this case, it's the keratinocytes, and that leads to those formation of the skin tags. Um, Psoriasis is another one. There are 3 times, if you have psoriasis, you're 3 times more likely to be insulin resistant than someone who doesn't have psoriasis. And some of this, again, we got to kind of see, is it a chicken or the egg? So you got increased inflammation if you're insulin resistant, but maybe that inflammation leads to insulin resistance too. It's hard to say, but with inflammation, we know you see that decreased insulin sensitivity. So again, they can kind of feed off of each other. One caveat or something I would like to add, just from my kind of personal anecdotal experience, and clients that have had issues with their skin, whether it's psoriasis or another skin issue, a lot of times what I see is when you address gut health, you do kind of clear up those issues a lot of times. Now, it should also be known that for me, when I say you address gut health, I don't just mean giving probiotics. That's normally part of it, so I'm not trying to say that's not a part, but that's not the only thing. So for me, addressing that means looking at digestion, trying to help people out there, which normally means changing their diet some. And a lot of times it is taking out a lot of highly processed foods that are more likely to spike blood sugar, which means more likely to spike insulin. So there could be some definite carryover there. But I do want to make that clear that I think gut health plays a big role in that, and I do think that insulin resistance can be a part of that gut health as well, just based on what the diet is. Um, Now the inner ear part, that's interesting. So it's 76% of people that have Meniere's disease are also insulin resistant. And for tinnitus or ringing in the ears, it's up to 92%. I want to make sure I get those percentages correct. And so what we see, the cochlea is part of the inner ear, and it seems to be, I don't know another way to say it, so it appears to be very sensitive to insulin signaling. What I mean by that is changes in insulin signaling are going to have kind of dramatic impacts on it. I'm not trying to say it's an insulin sensitive thing. We want it to be, just like we want other tissues in our body to be insulin sensitive. So again, if it starts to get resistant, that could impair the cochlea's function, which then could lead to some of these hearing issues. And there was one otolaryngologist that said that, glucose issues may be the cause for vertigo, or the most overlooked cause of vertigo, I guess I should say. All right, so that gives us a little bit of information on skin. So let's move to muscle. For most people, muscle is like 30, maybe 40% of their whole body mass. And so that means that muscle is the largest insulin sensitive tissue in our body. And that's a good thing. So we can kind of correlate it this way. The more muscle you have, the less insulin resistance you have. And the reason for that is the more muscle you have, the more storage area you have for glucose. Our body will store muscle glycogen. That glycogen is the stored glucose. Again, fat's another storage place too. We'd rather it not go there. We'd rather it go into the muscle. And so sarcopenia is a big thing. That's muscle wasting or losing muscle. And remember that insulin is a growth signal. So if we're not sensitive to that signal, we're not getting as much of that signal, then there's not going to be as much muscle growth. And so in that case, we're not going to gain muscle. And we'll be lucky to maintain it, but we could also lose it. And so with insulin resistance, we see increased muscle breakdown and less muscle building or muscle creation. So we're kind of getting that double whammy. We're not getting that growth input kind of coming in, and we're also decreasing the breakdown. So that's what leads to sarcopenia, or what can lead to muscle loss. That's not the only cause of sarcopenia. And so if we have a lot more muscle breakdown than we're having created, then we're going to lose muscle mass, and our muscle isn't going to function as well. So it's probably going to impact strength and performance measures in other ways as well. Fibromyalgia, we're including this in the muscle side just because of the muscle aches and pains. What we see with pain too is that there seems to be a connection to insulin resistance as well. So for central pain mechanisms, and this would be kind of one of those two. But for people with fibromyalgia, we tend to see elevated levels of hemoglobin A1C. So again, that's kind of a long-term glucose marker. If that level's elevated, then that means blood sugar levels have been elevated, which most likely means insulin levels have been elevated. The one thing I did find interesting, there have been some studies where they treated people with fibromyalgia and gave them metformin, which helps to decrease blood sugar, and people experience decreased pain just from the metformin. So, metformin is not a pain medication, but because it addressed the insulin side of things, it seemed to help out. This could be related to inflammation though as well. Again, if you go back and listen to some of the pain talks we did, pain's kind of a protective response. So if your brain's or central nervous system's kind of being bombarded by all these danger signals, danger inputs all the time, it's going to be more likely to try to protect you by having pain as an output. So if we decrease inflammation, we're also decreasing some of that danger input, those danger signals that are coming in. So it might play a role in that way as well. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. All right, moving on. Let's talk about bone. So again, bone's like muscle. There's breakdown and then there's buildup. And we need those processes going on all the time. We need it for muscle, we need it for our bone. But, we have two cells that are doing that, osteoblasts and osteoclasts. With insulin resistance, we have decreased bone strength and increased fracture risk. And so that's what can lead to osteoporosis. And so what this means is that when we have insulin resistance, we tend to, What insulin normally does is it helps to increase that osteoblast activity, which is creating new bone. And it tends to inhibit the osteoclast, which is breaking down bone. Again, we want some bone breakdown. Autophagy we'll talk about in a little bit, but we need some of that cleanup to be done, but we want those to be kind of balanced, and we'd rather there be bone rather than not. But if we're insulin resistant, then we're not getting that same input to the osteoblast. That activity is going down. We don't have that same inhibition on the osteoclast activity, which means its activity is going up. So we could possibly getting a net bone breakdown versus maintenance or net growth. Osteoarthritis, again, more likely to see the highest insulin levels in people that have osteoarthritis. This is the normal arthritis that people are talking about, when they say like my knee hurts and different things along those lines. And so what we see with this, the chondrocytes are involved in the cartilage and kind of developing that cartilage matrix. And again, it responds to insulin. So again, if the insulin resistance is there, it breaks down some of that normal autophagy. So again, that kind of cleaning up of the cartilage. And so then we have more of that area that's not as healthy there, which can then lead to problems. Sorry about that. Had a phone call come in. Also with insulin resistance, again, we get increased inflammation, and so that inflammation could affect the joints too. Similar with gout, we got increased inflammation there. The other part with gout is that we see where the kidneys, they start to build up uric acid. They can't kind of excrete it and get it out of the body. This means there's more floating around. It can settle into different joints and lead to different issues and problems of gout. So again, that's kind of a quick rundown of all the issues with bone and muscle, skin, and that little bit within our ear, and just how it relates to insulin resistance. So again, this is showing some connection, some correlation. Doesn't always mean causation or anything, but it does show too that a lot of times with these studies, if you're able to address that insulin level, you tend to help out on that issue. So, like again, the metformin helping people with fibromyalgia to have decreased pain. So, I think this is where having kind of that holistic approach can come into play, because we do want to address, diet and gut health. That could have an impact on insulin levels and insulin resistance. That could also have an impact on inflammation, which then could have an impact on insulin levels and insulin resistance, which when it's down, that's going to lead to decreased inflammation. So we've got several of these things that kind of work with each other and can lead to some big changes with things. So I hope this was informative for you guys. Again, this information, a good bit of it's coming from Dr. Bickman's book, so get that. I try to bring in some other things too, just to help clarify things a little bit more, make it make more sense. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Please like, subscribe. All the fun stuff to do. So it really helped me out, help get the channel to grow, and again, just help get this information to as many people as possible. So thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.